today, choices. In a few weeks, or maybe not, depending, I guess we'll find out. But in a few weeks, those of us who can vote, which is a lot of people in here, will have two choices. And these two choices really are, and I don't say this lightly, they are matters of life and death, especially what we're going to be talking about today. You'll be asked two questions in a referendum, and the questions are, number one, do you support the proposed cannabis legalization and control bill? Wow, what a response we got to that message last week. And lots of comments, lots of feedback on all sides of the spectrum. I've had people thank me even arriving today. Thank you so much. They're sending it to people, giving it to people, letting people hear it. And again, these are things we need to talk about. It's not something to sweep under the carpet or just, it's, you know, as a pastor just and as a, I guess a person who is a public figure in that kind of way, not that I'm saying I'm anything big or whatever, we've got to understand it's a scary thing to stand up and be able to speak out on those kind of things. But I've got to a place now where in my life, I guess I don't care. And I think we've just got, I mean, I care too much. It's not that I don't care. It's just I can't help what everybody else is thinking. I've got to take a stand for the things that I believe in and not be ashamed for that. So I'm just going to say as we get into today, again, I'm not giving you a Bible lesson here today, although we could. You know, as we talk about question number 2, which is, do you support the End of Life Choice Act 2019 come into force? We're talking about life and death here, but I could talk about it from a Christian perspective, but I'm not going to. This is a far wider, if you like, debate than just a Christian debate. Many people feel strongly about this. As a Christian, of course, I understand that our lives are valuable. As a Christian, I understand, of course, that we're created in the image of God. That's where it comes from. So where do we get our intrinsic value from? We get our intrinsic value not by what we contribute, not by what we do, not by how we live, not by what I've been able to do for society. I get my intrinsic value from God. I'm created in His image. I'm created in the image of God. And so human beings have intrinsic value in and of themselves. Take a $100 bill, screw it up. It doesn't matter how screwed up. And some of our lives can get pretty screwed up, people. But it doesn't matter how screwed up it is, you pull it up, it's still worth $100. I want to tell you, our worth is not defined by what we do or what we don't do. So that's what I'd say. That's where I'd start if I was going to give you a Bible lesson on it. But again, we're stuck with the place where there's so much to speak about and so little time to do it. So what do I put in? What do I leave out has been the challenge. So this will be very wordy today, but it's important that you understand it. Many people don't understand what we're talking about today. So 2 questions that I've read out. So the 2 questions for which you will have the opportunity to answer yes or no. Yes or no. I have already said I will be answering no to both. Last week we talked about question 1, and you can check it out. It's online. And today we're talking about question 2. Here it is again. Do you support the End of Life Choice Act 2019 coming into force? Well, what does that even mean? Well, what does that question? I mean, who knows? What does that mean? What does coming into force means? Understand this. Parliament has already passed this bill. It's passed. If you didn't know that, if you're thinking this is all about, hey, if we say yes to this, we're going to start the discussion, we're going to have a talk, we're going to see whether this is the way we go, you're mistaken. Parliament has already passed this bill. It is passed, it's done, it's sitting there waiting to go. In this binding referendum that we're partaking in, you are not voting to say, let's talk about it. You're not voting to say, let's have a little chat, see whether this is something we do. Your yes or no vote will be what decides where New Zealand goes with this. Your yes or no vote will be the thing that decides the direction New Zealand will go on this life and death. It really is a life and death issue. A yes vote will bring it into force. A no vote will bring it to a place where it's dropped. We are not going to pick it up. But what is it? What is it? What is the End of Life Choice Act? The government says on its referendum website, which will come up onto the screen, it says the Act gives people with a terminal illness the option of requesting assisted suicide. I'll read it again. The Act gives people with a terminal illness the option of requesting assisted suicide. And if you didn't believe me that it's already passed, read the next line. Parliament passed the End of Life Choice Act, but it has not yet come into force. The Act will only come into force if more than 50% of the voters in the referendum vote yes. I will be voting no, and I hope you do the same. So what is assisted dying? What is it? There's a lot of confusion about that. A nationwide Curia market research poll showed that the vast majority of New Zealanders are confused about what the Act actually means to legalise. I talked to one of our staff this week to test it. I pulled them into the room and said, well, I didn't pull them, just asked them to come in politely. And I said, what does this mean to you? What does this Act mean? Well, they said, well, I think it's, the ability to be able to turn off people's life support machines and all that kind of stuff. But they're wrong. That's what a lot of New Zealanders think it is. In fact, 74% of New Zealanders in that poll, 74% of New Zealanders thought the Act would make it legal for people to choose to have machines turned off that are keeping them alive, when in fact this is already legal. This is already legal. You can turn off the swap and people die a natural death. It's a life support machine. It supports life. You turn it off, people die a natural death. That is already legal. That's not what it's about. In the poll, 70% of New Zealanders thought the Act would make it legal for people to choose not to be resuscitated, when again, people can already ask for such a request. As a firefighter, one of the things that we're trained in is when we go to a CPR or a cardiac arrest and you rip off the shirt, ready to stick the things on to give the shock and whatever, if it's tattooed across their chest or there's something there or something on the wrist that's saying do not resuscitate, there is a procedure that we follow. That is already legal. There are already choices for people, but again, the death is natural. So understand that. It's very important that we get that. This is not about also, understand, refusing medication. That is already legal. If someone's getting to a place where whether it be cancer or whether they've got some illness that's causing destruction to the body, if you like, they can already get to, and they often do in those last days, they get to a place where they can refuse treatment, where they can say, I can't swallow anymore, I'm not going to take any more food. And the natural outcome of that is death. But it's a natural death and completely legal. But the next one that I'm going to say is very important that you understand, because I think many New Zealanders do not understand this. 75% of New Zealanders thought that the Act made euthanasia available to terminally ill people only as a last resort, after all treatments have been tried to control their pain. I want to make it very clear that is not the case. It is not the case. This is not, well, we've tried everything and this is the last resort. I want to tell you the Act allows for assisted suicide to be the first stop. It's very important that you understand this. The bill, the End of Life Choice Act, does not require, it may happen, but it does not require an eligible person to have tried any pain relief or palliative care, that's looking after those who are dying, before requesting a lethal dose. That is not required. That's pretty scary. No consultation with a palliative care or pain specialist is required under this Act. In fact, a person is not required to actually be in physical pain to be eligible. To be eligible, the Act requires that the person is experiencing unbearable suffering. Well, what is that? What is unbearable suffering? See, there is no definition of what unbearable suffering is in the act. Under the act, a person is not required to be in any physical pain whatsoever. The interpretation, and don't take there are lawyers who are saying this. This is not me making it up. Yeah, I had a read last night. Now, these are lawyers who are saying this. They've read it, they've understood it. The interpretation of unbearable suffering is left wide open to include suffering of any kind, such as psychological, mental, social, and spiritual suffering. In other words, if you are eligible, assisted suicide could be your first stop rather than your last resort. So what is this? What is this act? One lawyer said, this is the only legislation in New Zealand, and he's saying it just how it is. This is the only legislation in New Zealand that would give people the ability to kill another person legally. That's what it is. It's awfully quiet in here. What is assisted dying? What is assisted dying? Assisted dying is the term that is used on that website. Assisted dying is a term that is used for both euthanasia and assisted suicides. What is euthanasia? Euthanasia is an act or the act of intentionally and knowingly causing the death of a patient. It's causing the death of someone else at the request of the patient. If somebody, I'm requesting and then I'm going to help you do that, that is euthanasia. If someone other than the person who dies performs the last act, euthanasia has occurred. So the act would allow a doctor or a nurse to provide and administer a lethal dose of drugs. And you've got to understand this. I don't know anybody who signs up to be a nurse or a doctor these days who thought, and yet you're going to have to kill people as well. It's not what they do it for. It's not what they become. It's to help people. What is assisted suicide? And again, it's important we understand the terms. Assisted suicide occurs if the person who dies performs the last act. The end-of-life choice act allows for both euthanasia and assisted suicide. So assisted suicide is when the patient themselves pushes the button, gives the last dose. You know, as a Christian minister, I've been a pastor for a long time. And so I think for a lot of people, we're not familiar with death and dying. And so it's a very scary topic to talk about. In fact, it's something that we want to avoid. It's like, you know, if I go to 4 or 5 funerals in my life, that'll be enough. But as a pastor and a Christian minister, I've known what it is to journey with people as they have faced the tragic loss of a loved one. I know what that's like. I've known what it's like to walk through the valley of the shadow of death and tell them, fear no evil. I've known what that's like. I've known what it is to bury friends, good friends, young friends. I know what it's like to bury family. 2 years ago, almost to the day, my brother-in-law in India died, a 43-year-old husband and father of 2. I need a sister, widowed. I know what it's like. That funeral is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I know what it's like to journey through these things. I've known what it is to bury mums and dads, some of your mums and dads, sons and daughters. I've known what it is to be bury very, very young. I remember having to do a funeral of some premature born twins, 2 little babies, and to say a farewell. How do you do? I know what it's like to walk through that kind of pain. What do you say? What do you do? Nobody knows what to say in those kind of things. I've known what it is to see a disease ravage and steal the life away from a once strong and healthy person and literally wreck their body. And I've known what it is to weep with those whose children, whose brothers and sisters, whose life journey has become so dark and clouded that they thought the best option was for them to take their own life. I know what that is. See, I don't approach this referendum question lightly or untouched by pain, sorrow, and heartache. It's because of that I feel so strongly about that. It's because of that I'm deeply concerned that should this act pass, where will it lead us as a nation? And to be honest, I'm not alone. This is not like, us against the world. There are multiplied thousands of people who do not agree. Worldwide with euthanasia or assisted suicide. Do you know that 39,159 submissions were made to the select committee as they were preparing this to see whether this act should pass? 39,159 submissions were made. 92% of those submissions were opposed to the bill. Why don't the politicians listen? If you're listening, politicians, why don't you listen? 92% of those submissions were opposed to the bill, including 93% of those from doctors and health professionals were saying, don't do this. Do you know that the End of Life Choice Act has been publicly denounced? Not by just a few. It's been publicly denounced worldwide, but it's been publicly denounced as bad law. That which is being proposed or has been already set in place and just waiting for your tick has been denounced as bad law. And listen, everything I'm reading out today, you can check the sources. I'll give you places where these are not hard to find. It's bad law. It's been denounced as bad law by more than 200 New Zealand lawyers. That's a few. Just meeting one lawyer is enough. Come on. 200 New Zealand lawyers have said this is no good, and over 1,600 doctors. They say it is fatally flawed, literally. Fatally flawed, and it will be highly dangerous. To who? To the many vulnerable people should it come into force. You can't think of this on a personal level. You've got to understand, where will this lead? Where will this take us? It's interesting to me that right now, as a nation, we're in level 3 and level 2. We've locked down our city. The loss to the economy, $470 million a week. Why are we doing it? Because we want to protect our most vulnerable. We understand we might get through it. We understand it might not affect us, but it's not about us. We want to do whatever we can to protect the most vulnerable. Can I just say that's why we need to vote no, so we can protect the most vulnerable in our society, those who are struggling, those who are going through places in terrible danger of this act. How will it affect people? How will it affect our most vulnerable? Simply, the right to die could become a duty to die. We cannot ignore that possibility. That dependent people, our elderly, our ailing people, if they start or begin to feel a burden to their family or to their country's health system, and you're just using up all the money. Money could go to someone else. They feel a burden to their family, to their country's health system. They could feel the pressure when their doctor tells them, hey, here is an option. And if it's an option, why are you not taking it? Now, I know people will say, and people watching this perhaps will say, that wouldn't happen. That wouldn't happen here. That wouldn't happen, but it does. You can bring up that poster of what's happening in Oregon, where assisted suicide is legal, and in Washington. The U.S. state of Oregon, assisted suicide law came into effect 1998. The state of Washington followed 2009. In 2014, 4 out of 10, 6 in 10 assisted suicides were wholly or partly as the result of a patient feeling a burden on family and friends and caregivers and on society. And why should I be here? Man, I'm just a burden. Man, my problem creates so many difficulties for my family. 4 in 10. 6 in 10. Don't tell me it won't happen here. Don't tell me the minute we legitimize something, the minute you normalize something, that will not happen here. I mean, we want a culture of care and support in this nation. We have a culture of care and support. No one should ever have to ask the question, am I worth the bother? Am I really worth the bother? No one should ever have to ask that question. But I want to tell you, this gets past and people will start to ask that question. This is why we have so many doctors and lawyers who have said this bill is bad law. And it's not only, can I just say that some of the doctors who are speaking are also in favor of it, but they're saying this very act is bad law. It's just not a good thing that's been set up. Here are some of the reasons. Number one, there is no reliable safeguard to prevent someone from being pressured into euthanasia or assisted suicide. One doctor is simply required to do their best to detect pressure, and they can only speak to people that the patient lets them speak to. 2, no independent, all this is from the Act, people, you can research this yourself, it's pretty easy, I'll give you the resources. No independent witness is required at any point in the process, even at the time the lethal dose is injected or taken. Wow, does that open it up for abuse? 3, there is no protection against secret euthanasia or assisted suicide. Someone in the 8 a.m. service told me that they knew of someone who quietly has just recently done that from another country. There's no protection against that. There is no requirement to ensure that a person is mentally competent on the day the lethal dose is injected. There's no requirement. Are you okay? Are you in the right frame of mind? There's no protection for terminally ill people who are also depressed or mentally ill. No protection. And there is no required cooling off period before the lethal dose is prescribed. I think from you deciding to do it, according to this act, it's 48 hours. You can be getting the injection. You ever had a bad day where you just go, man, I'm done? Or a bad couple of days. You ever had a bad week and thought life could never get any better, but then it does? Yeah. You know, when you think about it, as a terminally ill patient, if the doctor says you've got 6 months, how do you process that you're going to die in 6 months? You would thought you were going to. How do you even get the mental capability to assess all of that information and make a good decision? Oregon, which we saw before, has a 15-day cooling off period. So it's like, take some time, think about this. Because it's kind of final. Yeah. And I know people will say to me as a pastor, you obviously haven't read it, I have read it. But people say, look, this bill is for the terminally ill patients. It's for terminally ill. It's not for people who have mental stress or depression. And all I'd say is not yet. Not yet. See, because we all know, we've seen it throughout our lifetime. And when this is not our first time around the block. These laws have a way of expanding over time. It's about getting it across the line, then we'll expand it over time. That even rhymes. See, if the key is given to open this Pandora's box, who knows where it will lead? I can hear the arguments now. I was thinking, what arguments could be brought up? Because it's obvious the arguments like, who are you? Who are you to say that my mental pain is not as valid as your physical pain? Who are you to say that the stuff I'm walking through is not as valid as the stuff you're walking through? And after all, it's my right, my body, my choice, right? My body, my choice. And we already know that always results in the death of someone. How far could it go? Well, pretty far. We don't have to guess. We know from the past such laws have taken in other countries. This week an article came out from Canada that I saw. It had just come out at the beginning of the month, but it says hundreds of sick Canadians euthanized over loneliness. You ever been lonely? You've had a day where you felt like, man, no one cares about me. It says, good grief, we were told that euthanasia is about compassion, but how compassionate it is when last year in Canada, hundreds of sick people were euthanized because of loneliness. Why not help them out? The country's 2019 Medical Assisted in Dying annual report found that 13.7% of the 5,631 Canadians killed by doctors asked to be lethally injected because of isolation and loneliness. If my math is right, that's about 771 people, or 64 a month, or 2 per day. Look at these other reasons people are being euthanized. Loss of ability to engage in enjoyable activities. Loss of ability to perform activities of daily living. Inadequate. These are reasons people put down for why they want to be taken out, I guess. Loss of ability to perform activities of daily living. Inadequate control of pain or just concern about it. Loss of dignity. That's a big one, loss of dignity. That's a big one used, loss of dignity, loss of dignity. You know, sometimes people will say, they'll use the argument, it's like, you know, coming to the end of life and, you know, having people to have to care for you and all that kind of takes away from the dignity of life, having people to look after you and change your sheets and look up. Do you know that was actually said? And the Disability Commissioner said, what the heck are you saying? Well, she didn't say that. She was more PC than that. But what she was really saying was, you're speaking about the disabled's daily life. That's their daily life, to have someone care. It's a privilege and an honor to care for them. It's not a hassle, it's a privilege and an honor. We shouldn't be saying that, because the minute we say that, we're devaluing human life and saying, you're not worthy, you're not worthy. Think about this, people. I'm not saying that strongly, but I'm saying it kind of strongly. Think about it. Or let it be strong, I don't care. Perceived burden on family, friends, and caregivers. What about elder abuse? What about all those emotional distress, anxiety? I mean, who hasn't had a bad day? How far will it go? Pretty far. The article goes on to say most Canadians are proud of their doctors, that their doctors can legally kill sick people whose deaths are reasonably foreseeable. Not only that, but the country is now engaged in the process, it's expanding, the process that will expand the conditions qualifying for a lethal injection, including incompetent people with dementia, if they ask to be put down. It's not a cat. Put down in an advance directive. That means they've asked for it, they've gone into the dementia now, they'd asked for it when they were there, and we can take them out. It is so bad in Ontario that if a doctor refuses to euthanize a legally qualified patient or find another doctor he or she knows will kill, they risk professional discipline. Friends, I want to say this: when taking your own life becomes a legitimate option or valid alternative, when it becomes just another one of your choices that your health professional, I can tell you it's not very good for health, that your health professional presents, how far can it go? Pretty far. In the Netherlands, a 54-year-old with an eating disorder was euthanized. A woman in her 70s who had dementia was secretly drugged and held down by her family while a doctor euthanized her despite her protests. Now, you're saying, how could that happen? Well, easily. When she was in sane mind, she said, I'd like to be euthanized. When she had dementia, could no longer cope, doctor said, right, hold her down. Even though she was saying, no, I want to live, I want to live. No, you've got dementia. Think it can't happen? It does. How far will it go? Pretty far. See, that's why they call it a slippery slope. There is concrete evidence from countries which have introduced euthanasia that the availability and application of euthanasia expands to situations not initially envisaged. We've seen all laws do that. Yeah. I think there's a special word for it. When a newly permitted activity is characterized, listen, as a human right, my body, my choice. When this becomes it's my right to die. We're already hearing that being spouted around. When a newly permitted activity is characterized as a human right, the overseas experience is there is inevitably a push to extend such a right to a greater number of people, such as those with chronic conditions, disabilities, mental illness, those simply tired of life, or even children. You're saying no, yes. Euthanasia became legal in the Netherlands in 2002. It allows euthanasia for those aged at least 12 years of age. Children aged from 12 to 15 years require parental consent. And you think, how can no children would do that? Well, what about a kid with a terminal illness? Mum and dad are so hassled by having to look after me all the time. Jeepers. More recently, some Dutch death doctors, that's what I'm calling them, are urging lawmakers to extend the euthanasia law to include children aged 1 to 12. We're already killing them in the womb. Let's just make it all wholesale all the way through. Professor Theo Bauer was a member of the Dutch Regional Euthanasia Commission for 9 years. During that, he was involved in reviewing 4,000 cases. He was a strong supporter of euthanasia and argued originally that there would be no slippery slope. However, in 2014, he had a complete change of mind. He testified to UK politicians considering the issue. Here's what he said. Whereas in the first years after 2002, hardly any patients with psychiatric illness or dementia appear in reports. These numbers are now sharply on the rise. Cases have been reported in which a large part of the suffering of those given euthanasia or assisted suicide consisted in being aged, lonely, or bereaved. Some of these patients could have lived on for years, if not decades. And I heard someone say, we don't have the death penalty in New Zealand. It's probably the most severest thing. We don't have the death penalty. I mean, there's probably people maybe who deserved it. Someone who killed a child, or someone who, I mean, we've got a mosque shooter who killed 51 people. You know, so that's kind of a, you know, there's kind of a case for it, but we don't have it in New Zealand. We've decided as a nation not to do that. Why? Because the whole protection there is, what if we make a mistake? What if we make a mistake? What if we make a mistake? See, doctors get it wrong. Heaps, I've seen it. You're going to go, Mark Steele, come down, he's going to die tonight, and he didn't. He lived for, I don't know, 15 years. How do you process that? What could have been? We have to seriously think about these issues. Let's watch this video.
Kylie always was a kid who would push herself. I remember when she was doing her dancing, she just absolutely loved it. But she kept on getting told off for not standing up straight.
Straighten those knees.
We didn't understand it at the time, but she had a crooked spine.
I constantly fell and tripped, broke bones, sprained ankles. My body just wasn't like other kids' bodies.
We started off, you know, go to the doctor, get it sorted, this will be fine. Then we were put through to another doctor, and then another doctor, and sort of suddenly the weeks were turning into months. The months turned into years, and we're still, give us an answer, what's going on? One of the specialists said, I think it is Ehlers-Danlos, And we went through all the different diagnoses that the doctors had given over the years. And here were all these little flags that had been coming up, but we didn't understand them.
I have a connective tissue disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Connective tissue is your collagen, and collagen is the glue that holds every cell of our bodies together. Our bones, joints, internal organs, skin, everything. And then you're going to go up and you're going to run it up my arm. There's literally a piece in my DNA that is missing, so there's no cure. It has been getting worse over time.
And Kylie and I have talked about death and what it will look like in the end. The struggle of that, the reconciling living a day-to-day life and wanting to do well tomorrow and today, and yet going, oh man, it could be tomorrow. You know, it could be in a short while, or it could not.
There definitely have been times when I think all I can offer Kylie is just a hug. You know, I'm not someone who lives with a disability or with chronic illness or debilitating pain, so all I can offer her is just my friendship.
I know that when people suffer, and we see a lot of suffering in the pain clinic, that people may not feel like life is a gift and may not feel that they are valuable to their families and their community. But I think it's often hard for patients to see their own value, and often it is in plain sight for people around them, but they often perceive themselves as of a lesser value or invaluable to society just because they have an irremediable problem such as pain or a condition such as the one that Kylie suffers from.
What happens then if one or two of those doctors were to talk with me about euthanasia? It would be very, very difficult for me to exclude that from my mind. I would feel a sense of pressure. All of a sudden, I'm having to consider things I've never had to consider before. The cost of my treatment, or am I worthy of it? Should I have it, or is it just more of a burden on society? And what happens when society starts having conversations about the fact that, well, why are we supporting her when she's eligible for euthanasia? Because if she had euthanasia, we could redirect this money over here.
A society that sees us as disabled as having lost all function, as being meaningless or as being a burden. In fact, I've read the comments on social media where as soon as this topic comes up, people tell us to kill ourselves, that we're a waste of money. Don't waste any more resources on disabled because only able-bodied should have them. So it's an indication that there's nowhere near any sense of safety for a lot of disabled who are trying to live.
We know that generally people can't afford the medications, and so for many of them they make the choice of not bothering to have the treatment. And not because they want to die, of course they don't want to die, but because they simply have no choice. No one ever said to me, look, I want to get assistance for me to die. They wanted to be assisted to live and to live their life in the fullest way that was possible for them.
We need to consider how can we lift the mana of those in our community who are so vulnerable.
There will always be those people, and we think, you know, that euthanasia will relieve some of that, and it won't. In fact, you'll have a society that's less resilient and less able to bear the weight with those people that do choose to stay. If every time something got hard, we decided, no, I'll just cut that off, we'd never see people that change the world.
It's also not a good and healthy message when you've got people who may be suicidal or have suicide ideations in periods of time when something goes hard, that society turns around and says, well, maybe end your life, darling. It'd be less burden for everybody, and you'll be out of it all. And that type of message is becoming more common rather than the message that, look, we're going to look after you, we're going to care for you from the cradle to the grave.
What Kylie has decided in herself, that she's going to be one of those lights that says, hey, yeah, it sucks and it's hard and I get frustrated and I get angry and I cry and all of that stuff, but that's for a moment. I'm still focused on living.
The irony is, we have one of the highest youth suicide rates in the world, and we're having a conversation about, you know, young people and suicide and don't kill yourself and there's life and there's things to live for. And yet, on the other hand, we're having a conversation about euthanasia where we're saying it's okay to want to end your life, but actually it's not my irremediable medical health condition that's causing my suffering, it's my mental health and it's my headspace.
There are many deeper issues that sometimes perpetuates the pain or keep people stuck in their dire situation. And it's really important that as a pain physician, your patient trusts you enough to disclose information that you can work out what is really going on. And it often affects patients on multiple levels.
Now, under the bill as it stands, I'm encouraged to talk to my family, but I'm also told I don't have to. So the very first thing my family could know about my euthanasia is by receiving my death certificate.
Of course you don't want your family to suffer, but I think the implications of this bill are wider than that.
It's not just as simple as just saying no, because there becomes all the pressure of expectation and burdenship. And all of a sudden I feel like, well, maybe I have to make that decision. And if even one or two of my doctors were to have the conversation of euthanasia with me, their voice and their opinion carries weight.
I feel quite sad because what it does, it undermines the essential things that we believe in as tangata whenua, saying that that's of no consequence. I wouldn't do it, and I would hope that others would think very carefully about what might rest on their minds into the future.
I want them fighting for her to live, not to be encouraging her to die, because they put a value on life of what it could be like.
Also wanting to do with my life? Yeah.
That girl who wanted to swing the highest, run the fastest, pushing herself to the limits, even though her body has changed, it's got older, but it's also got health issues, but those same traits are there.
Euthanasia is so final. There's no second chance. There's no coming back. And I know so many people who were given a short life expectancy, 6 months less, who are now living life still 2, 5, 10 years later. And for those who choose euthanasia in that situation, that's it. It's final. And you miss out on all that's to come. And the family has a process that they have to grieve through as well, and question and wonder, well, could the doctors have actually had it wrong? Despite the fact that my health has progressed and my condition has deteriorated, I live an amazing life. And it looks different and it's not the same and there's struggles, but there's still life.
Wow. We want a culture of care and support where no one needs to ask, am I worth the bother? So what's the solution? What's the answer? Well, there is no easy answer, but I think we need assisted living, not assisted dying. I heard an interview on One News, I think it was by the Disability Commissioner, and on that interview, she said this: we need to help people live a good life rather than die a good death. And what does that mean? Well, we as a nation need to properly fund palliative care for people. It's not properly funded. The fact that there has to be an op shop for Mary Potter Hospice, where they've got to get people second-hand clothes and sell it, shows me that we have a health system that is not properly taking care of those who are dying. We need a fully funded palliative care system in this nation that treats it the same as the normal hospital, where this is a very much an important part of people's lives. They shouldn't be having to scrimp and save, and that should be even across the country, not depending on how much money they can raise at their op shop. We need better training for doctors and nurses to understand death and dying. We need to be better educated to understand that death and dying is not something to be afraid of, that it can be understood. And although we try to avoid it, that we need to process that. Because as you heard, it's not so much the physical pain, it's a lot of it's in the head. These are the issues that people are struggling with. You know, when it comes or becomes better to kill rather than care, we as a nation and as a people have lost our way. And that's why I'll be voting no to the End of Life Choice Act, because I want to protect the vulnerable. I want to save people's lives. You know, as a Christian, as I said, I believe we're made in the image of God. That's where our value comes from, where everybody's value comes from. If you want to know where I got a lot of the resources, 3 websites, you can check it out later, or they'll just bring them up. rejectassistedsuicide.org.nz, great website. Another one, votesafe.nz, really powerful one, short, plenty of videos like the one you just watched. defendnewzealand.co.nz, again, plenty of videos like the one we just watched. Jesus said this: the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. Choose life. Choose life. Please stand. Put your hands out like this and let me pronounce a blessing over you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you, and on your family, and on your children, and on your children's children. May the Lord be gracious to you. May he turn his face toward you and give you peace. Amen. If you want prayer,